حلقة جديدة من برنامج حديث الرياض، نتحدث فيها عن التجارب الشخصية التي خلدها التاريخ بمواقفها ولحظاتها التي غيرت شكل الأحداث عبر ندوة بعنوان قيادة خالدة الأثر، دروس من أعظم عقول التاريخ. ضيفها الكاتب الأستاذ والتر آيزاكسون، وتحاوره الأستاذة ياسمين الخويطر. ولد والتر آيزاكسون في نيو أورلينز عام 1952، وتخرج من جامعتي هارفارد وإكسفورد. بدأ مسيرته الصحفية في سانداي تايمز وتايم. هو أستاذ تاريخ في جامعة تولين وشريك استشاري في شركة بيرلا واينبورغ. شغل مناصب قيادية مثل الرئيس التنفيذي لشبكة CNN ومعهد أسبن ورئيس تحرير مجلة تايم. ومن أبرز السير الذاتية التي كتبها والتر آيزاكسون إيلون ماسك وليوناردو دافنشي وستيف جوبز وإينشتاين. يقدم برنامج إيمنبور أند كامباني على BBS وCNN، ويشارك في CNBC، ويقدم بودكاست تريل بليزرز.
Hello, I hear wonderful things about you. Thank you so much.
How was your first day out?
Oh, it's great. It's great. We went to the garage. Very good. The garage is amazing. I've been here before, but not in Riyadh, actually. And I've been to the region quite a bit. In my opinion, a biography should be written when somebody changes the course of history, when they create a revolution. Benjamin Franklin did that by creating this notion of connecting science with governance and creating a new form of government in America. Einstein creates a revolution in physics by understanding relativity and quantum. Likewise, Steve Jobs and Bill Gates create a revolution in information by creating personal computers. Jennifer Doudna does that in genetics by creating gene editing, and now Elon Musk doing it with space travel and electric vehicles. These are the type of people who deserve biographies. The main advice I'd give somebody who wants to write a biography is to be a storyteller. Don't be a preacher. Don't try to overanalyze things. Just tell a story the way you would at a dinner, in which you're doing it chronologically, and begin with those 6 magic words. Let me tell you a story. And that way you can connect with the reader. How wonderful. Pretty amazing. This is huge. When I came to the book fair, I didn't realize all the books that are now available here. The huge wealth of material. There's more books available on the floor of this book festival than any book festival in the world. And to me, that openness to new information, it will make a vibrant society. Yeah.
My name is Fahad. Welcome to Saudi Arabia.
Thank you so much.
I'm very proud to see you. I read this book twice. Can I have a photo?
Sure. When I walk through this book festival and I see the excitement that people have about new ideas, I realize how vibrant the next decades are going to be in Riyadh, which is an amazing city, and in Saudi Arabia and the kingdom in general. It's going to be a whole new era, and it's so exciting. Thank you.
It's really a great honor to meet you.
It was so fun to meet you.
Can I take a picture with you?
Sure.
That's okay. Thank you very much.
I read the book the moment it was released, that I got this copy especially for you.
Sign it here?
Yeah, please. It's a great pleasure
Thank you.
to hear you today.
ستايل الحوار اللي بستخدمه اليوم مع والتر آيزاكسون مختلف صراحة من بقية الناس اللي نشوفهم بالبودكاستات أو على التلفزيون، لأن ما أحب أحرج صراحة الشخص اللي قدامي وما أشوف إنه في فايدة منه. فلما أشوف نفسي كصديقة أو مساعدة للشخص أطلع منهم القصص بأكثر راحة وهم يرتاحون ويقولون الأشياء اللي ممكن لو أحرجتهم ما بيرتاحون وما بيطلع القصص المميزة منهم.
سعيد كثير اليوم بتواجدي في معرض الكتاب الدولي في الرياض وبانتظار حضور ندوة الأستاذ ويلتر مع أستاذة ياسمين الخويطر بشغف، لأنه الإنسان هذا مميز جدا في موضوع القيادة والابتكار.
أنا من أشد المعجبين فيه، فحابة أعرف صراحة عن إيش حيحكي اليوم. إن شاء الله إن نستمتع يعني.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. مساء الخير. أنا ياسمين الخويطر، ويشرفنا يكون معنا اليوم الكاتب العالمي والتر آيزاكسون، واحد من أهم الأسماء في كتابة السير، وكتب سير أشخاص مثل إيلون ماسك، ألبرت أينشتاين وستيف جوبز. وأيضاً كان رئيس CNN، والآن يدرس التاريخ في إحدى الجامعات المعروفة في أمريكا، تولين يونيفرسيتي. وسيتحدث اليوم عن الإبداع والقيادة عند بعض أهم الشخصيات في التاريخ.
What really counts is being creative. For me, it begins with Benjamin Franklin, who took the concepts of the scientific revolution and applied them to government. Elon Musk was a very lonely child growing up, had no friends, he was socially awkward, but he spent his time in the corner of bookstores. It is really great to be here in Riyadh and at this wonderful book festival. I never knew how much innovation and startup and entrepreneurship and creativity was flowering in Riyadh. And I got to see it today. I went to the Garage and other places where they have entrepreneurs working, and it made me think about what I want to talk to you today about, which is how entrepreneurship works, how we have people who touch the surface of history and make a difference. We all know smart people, but one thing I've realized in my career, what really counts is being creative, being innovative. And this is what the people that I've talked about in my innovation revolutions have been able to do. For me, it begins with Benjamin Franklin, who took the concepts of the scientific revolution and applied them to government. I never really thought of Benjamin Franklin as a scientist, but then I realized that the kite flying experiment, that all of the science he did led to the ideas of balance of power and help bring the notion of science being applied to governance and being applied to invention. Then, at the beginning of the 20th century, you have the atomic revolution. I tried to tell that story through Albert Einstein, and in his papers, he takes the kernel of our universe, which is the atom, and he helps bring us into an era of space travel, atomic energy, GPS, microchips, semiconductors. Einstein did that not simply by being the smartest scientist of his time. In fact, he said, I'm not really smarter, I'm just more curious and more imaginative. Then the second half of the 20th century. The second half of the 20th century also involves a tiny particle like the atom, but that particle is the gene, and it leads to a life science revolution. You have people like Jennifer Doudna inventing ways to be able to take the gene and be able to edit it. And of course, there's the digital revolution that takes another tiny primary bit of nature, the binary digit in which we can encode all the information. And that's what Steve Jobs brings us. After doing all of that, I wanted to look at something that in Saudi Arabia, you know very much about, which is the energy revolution, energy transition, the transition to have both solar power, petrochemical power, and electricity. And I did it through Elon Musk. Also, he was leading a space revolution. When I went to the garage today, I was impressed by how many startup companies are doing things with satellite and space in Saudi Arabia, imaging from satellites and being able to tell how much water or gas is being used. And so to me, to be able to get to this next set of revolutions, I wanted to do it through Elon Musk. Now, Musk also is leading us into the next revolution, which is artificial intelligence. When we think of artificial intelligence now, we think of chatbots, where I can say something like, tell me about the Riyadh Book Fair, and it'll chatbot me an answer. But the important thing that will happen with artificial intelligence is not simply large language models, not simply chatbots. It will be the type of artificial intelligence that can navigate in the real world, such as cars that can be able to drive themselves, or robots that will be able to navigate across a room to take visual images, to see things. That's Elon Musk with his young kid X saying hello to Optimus the robot. And so when you look at these people who have thought out of the box, you have to ask what makes them different. One thing is to always be curious. This is Albert Einstein. And when he was a very young child, his father gave him a compass. And Einstein was amazed at how the compass needle always pointed north, no matter how you move the compass. Nothing touches the needle. And so he couldn't figure out, what is a force field? How would that make a compass needle move? It's that type of curiosity that is the number one trait of creative people and of innovators. And the importance is to be curious for its own sake. For example, in Einstein's notebooks, in Benjamin Franklin's notebooks, they all write the same question: why is the sky blue? And you have Benjamin Franklin doing tests with different types of water. You have Einstein trying to figure out Lord Rayleigh's formula and how it scatters atoms. Now, today, when we were walking around, you're blessed in Saudi Arabia with a really blue sky. I come from New Orleans, it's often rainy, but we don't stop and think, why is the sky blue? But it is that type of curiosity that really distinguishes great innovators. Another major topic of the innovators I have written about is a desire to explore. These are Elon Musk's grandparents, and they had that tiny single-engine plane, and they moved it from Canada to South Africa and then to New Zealand. They kept exploring, and this is something that I think is inherent in the human species. Now, people like Musk and people like in the Saudi community that are doing startups in the garage are looking at new ways to explore just for the sake of exploration. That's Elon right there at his very first rocket launches, the Falcon 1, where he's doing it not because he has any particular great business model for it. He's doing it simply because he felt it was important to explore space and for humanity to get to Mars. He was a very lonely child growing up, Elon Musk. He had no friends. He was socially awkward. But he spent his time in the corner of bookstores reading science fiction. And he said that if he ever had money, if he was ever a success, he was going to have 3 missions. One was to explore the stars and to make humanity a species that went to different planets. Secondly, was to have sustainable energy on this planet. And the third was to make sure our robots were safe. They didn't turn on us. Another thing that I think that great entrepreneurs do is they think visually. I told you about Einstein and the compass needle. And he just kept trying to visualize, what does a force field do? How does it touch the needle? But when he was working as a clerk in the patent office in Switzerland, and he's trying to figure out devices that synchronize clocks, with his office overlooking the clock tower in Bern, Switzerland, looking at the trains and trying to visualize the speed of light. And he comes up with a leap of imagination that comes from being able to visualize things and think out of the box. And he realizes that if you're traveling really fast towards one of the clocks, what looks synchronized to you will be different than for somebody who's traveling really fast in the other direction. And so he makes this leap of the imagination that time is relative, that the speed of light is always constant, but time, in other words, synchronizing clocks, that's how we define time, that time is relative depending on your state of motion. Now, if you don't quite get that leap of the imagination, don't worry. That was in 1905. In 1906, he's still a patent clerk. In 1907, he's still a patent clerk because the scientific community had no idea what he was talking about, that the speed of light was constant, but time is relative. It's not until 1909 that they figure out that this patent clerk has come up with the theory of relativity simply by visualizing what it's like to ride alongside a night beam. And that's another important lesson, is the ability to think different, to think out of the box. When I was doing the book on Steve Jobs, and he had come back to Apple Computer after being fired, he wrote the copy for an advertisement. It wasn't an advertisement for a computer. It was just an advertisement that said, here's what we believe at Apple. And it was called the Think Different ads. And it used Einstein as one of the faces. And it said, here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in a square hole. He was telling me about this once in the backyard of his house. And he recited this whole poem, this whole advertising copy, by heart. And as he got near the end, there were tears in his eyes. I thought maybe he had gotten some pollen or something in his eye. But no, he said, it's just emotional to me, the importance of thinking different. And that ad ends by saying, it's about here's to the crazy ones, because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. I use that as the epigram for my Elon Musk book, because Elon Musk is crazy. He really is. He's a mess. But he's crazy enough to think he can change the world, and he's the one doing it. Steve Jobs did it with passion, and passion is another attribute of great innovators. When I first started working with Steve, He made me go to this tiny tract house in Central California where he grew up. His father was a high school dropout, an auto mechanic. And in that garage, they would fix up cars. And of course, a little bit later in that garage, he and a kid from around the corner would start a computer company. And when Steve Jobs asked me to go walk with him around the house, he pointed out that fence. You can see part of the fence there. And he said when he was young, he helped his father build that fence. And then he made me walk all the way around the backyard to the other side of the fence, which just faces some scrub land. And he showed me the back of the fence. And he said, my father told me that we had to make the back of the fence just as beautiful as the front of the fence. And Steve said, why? Nobody's ever going to see the back of the fence. Nobody will ever know. And his father said, yes, but you will know. He said, a great artist, somebody who cares about their product, cares even about the parts that are unseen. And so early on in 1983, when they were doing the original Macintosh computer, that's when I first met Steve Jobs. He brought it to Time magazine, and he showed me the beautiful case and the icons on the screen, and made me use a jeweler's loupe to look at each pixel. But when he got back to California and they were starting to make the machine, he looked at the circuit board inside. And he told his engineers, this is ugly. This stinks. And they said, what do you mean? He said, well, the chips aren't lined up straight. It doesn't look beautiful. And they said, well, Steve, it's inside a sealed case. Nobody will ever see it. Nobody will ever know. And Steve told them the story of the fence in his backyard. And so they held up shipping the original Macintosh so that they could make the circuit board inside beautiful. Likewise, everybody I've written about has a higher sense of mission. Elon Musk has those 3 missions: sustainable energy, going to different planets, making our robots safe. When he decided he wanted to have a mission to Mars, nobody, a private company, even NASA, had quit sending astronauts up to the moon. But he had no way to fund it. But he said, I'm going to embark on the mission. As he did so, he built rockets that could be launched and then land upright so they could be reused over and over again. Nobody else has been able to do that, not Russia or China or the United States or NASA. And so by doing that, he's able to send up thousands of satellites. And he recreated with Starlink the internet in outer space. And my point is, you start with the mission and then figure out a way to get a business model that'll help you get there. You don't start with the desire to make a profit. You start with the desire to fulfill a mission. Then, too, there's a particular trait that we're lacking a bit these days, and that's the trait of humility. Benjamin Franklin, when he created something like the Garage, a sort of gathering place for the startup entrepreneurs and small business owners in Philadelphia when he was a young printer there, they made a list of all the virtues you need to be a successful startup business person. And if you read his autobiography, you see it: temperance, silence, order, resolution, frugality, industry. And he was very much a geek. So he made a chart, and every week he marked on the chart, on each day, how well he did on each of those virtues. At one point, at the weekly meeting of the club, he showed off the chart and said he had mastered all of the virtues. And one of the people in the club said, You know, Franklin, there's a virtue you don't have on your list that you might want to try. And Franklin says, what's that? And the friend says, humility. You might want to add that one to your list. What I love about Franklin is he says, I was never very good at the virtue of humility. I never mastered it. But I learned to fake it very well. I learned the pretense of humility. And his genius was, he said, and I learned that the pretense of humility was just as useful as the reality of humility, because it made you listen to the person next to you. It made you try to find the common ground. And he said, and that was the essence of the middle-class economy that we were trying to build in Philadelphia. And so that notion of being able to have some humility, you can see it as he helps create the United States. That was part of the humility that helped Ben Franklin form a nation. Other great lessons, Steve Jobs always simplified. When he makes the original iPod, he says, I want to be able to get to any song in 3 clicks. And the engineers say, well, we need to get the artist and the writer and everything. He said, no, just figure out a way to do it in 3 clicks. They come up with that wonderful scroll wheel, which is intuitive. You just go like that, and you get to the song you want. And when they finished, he loved it, except for he said about a button they had on the top, what's this button? And they said, well, it's the on-off button. And Steve said, what does it do? And they're kind of puzzled, and finally somebody's brave enough to say, it turns it on and off. And Steve said, why do we need it? And he was right. If you quit using your iPod for a while, it knows how to turn itself down. If you start using, it turns it up again. It was that ability to simplify, as Elon Musk does, by having a casting machine that made the entire chassis of a Tesla in one casting. That's what made things simple. And always aim ahead. That's Jennifer Doudna. When all of the men were looking at DNA in the year 2000 to do the Human Genome Project, most of the women were not allowed to be involved. They were left out. So the women started looking at RNA, the less famous molecule. As always happens, the less famous molecule is the one that actually does the work. DNA just sits there and curates information in your nucleus of your cell. RNA takes that information and builds proteins. So by thinking ahead, aiming ahead, they were able to do it. And most important is to be moral. When you're going to be able to edit genes, have artificial intelligence, have robots, you have to say, how are we going to be moral? How are we going to use it? Are we going to be able to edit our children, be able to make sure they're taller, or maybe their hair color, or maybe even their IQ? Do we want to have a system where people can design their own children? And so over the years, this is Elon talking to Sam Altman. They've had a big fight because he believes Altman has abandoned the moral principles of it. And so whether it's artificial intelligence or gene editing, we have to connect it to our humanities. That ability to aim higher distinguishes all the people I've written about. You look at Albert Einstein, his very last notebook pages. There he is after having an aneurysm at Princeton Hospital. And after everybody leaves that night, and it's going to be his last night, he's still writing line after line of equation, trying to figure out how to get a unified field theory that shows how quantum mechanics and relativity, or to put it more simply, why does the compass needle twitch and point north? As for Steve Jobs, when he was dying, I asked him, what was the whole point of this? And he said, when I had a guru in India, he taught me that life is like a river. And if you're successful, you take a whole lot of things out of the river. You get wonderful products that people who made before you came, wonderful ideas, wonderful poetry, wonderful inventions. He says, but now I've learned that what really matters is not what you get to take out of the river, but what you get to put in the river. So thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.
What does a young nation need to do in order to foster a generation of leaders and innovators?
Somebody once said, if you want to have a great city, build a great university and wait 100 years.
In your opinion, what is the next big breakthrough and who should we keep an eye on?
Well, obviously right now it's artificial intelligence.
Thank you so much, Mr. Isaacson, for that inspiring talk. And what an honor it is to be here with you tonight in Riyadh to talk about these topics.
And an honor to be with you, and a great podcaster. I'm looking forward to it. Fortunately, podcasts in English too. So I'll be able to listen to your podcast, Jasmine.
Would love to have you on. Very exciting. And I'm sure tonight as well, the audience is very keen to hear more about leadership and innovation. And perhaps the best way to start that is to unpack the definition of leader itself. Now, in your talk, you spoke about leadership being timeless, but a lot has also changed between Benjamin Franklin and Elon Musk. So maybe you can tell us how the definition of leadership has evolved over time.
I think that in the current age, leadership is a collaborative effort, is not just by being a great vision, it's by putting together a team. When Steve Jobs was dying, I asked him, what was the most important product you made? And I thought he would say the iPhone or maybe the Macintosh. Instead, he said, making a good product is hard, but what's really important is making a team that will continue to make good products. And that ability to make a team is why Apple is still successful.
Interesting. And that goes a little bit against some of these things we've heard about somewhat polarizing figures like Steve Jobs and Elon Musk.
Well, Elon, has a little problem sometimes being too polarizing. We biographers have a dirty secret, is that sometimes we make it seem like a guy or a gal goes into a garage or a garret and they have a light bulb moment and they're a leader. When in fact, as I said, it's a team sport. So one of the books I've written is called The Innovators, and it's not about a single person. It's about how teams from Intel to Microsoft were formed. And I tried to do that in The Codebreaker. Even though Jennifer Doudna is the main character, the trait that she has is bringing people together to be part of the team that wins the Nobel Prize.
Inspiring. And when we look at these individuals, you've outlined a couple of the traits that they have. And I think it's fair, like you said, a lot of people believe that they have these traits, that they have mission and passion. Is there some sort of other, perhaps hidden quality, perhaps a higher appetite for risk or even for sacrifice that also sets individuals apart?
Right. If I'd had 60 minutes instead of 40, I have a few other things. And the ability to take risk is part of that slide I showed about explore, adventure. And we used to be, in the United States, a nation of risk takers. And one problem we have in the United States is we now have more referees than we have risk takers. I think that as I watched Saudi Arabia become a nation of entrepreneurs, as I toured the garage and saw the people there, I realized that Saudi Arabia, I learned, has the largest amount of risk capital and venture capital of any nation in the entire MENA region by far. And that ability to take risks is what's going to make the Saudi entrepreneur economy blossom.
That's an interesting point because we've been talking about it at the individual or group level. But when we look at it from the macro level, what does a young nation need to do in order to foster a generation of leaders and innovators?
I think that it's always important to look at what places become cradles of creativity, what places help nurture not only innovation, but creativity, arts, etc. And you can go through history and find those places. There's Florence in 1500. What does it have? It has a lot of diversity. People are coming from the Arab world to follow the Ottoman Empire, whatever. And what are they bringing to Florence? They're bringing algebra. Secondly, a place like Florence had a great university. Somebody once said, if you want to have a great city, build a great university and wait 100 years. And here you now have, the University Research Park that I went to today. And so what you need is that mix of some diversity, some belief in listening to people who are different from you, an ability to form teams, a willingness to take risks, and then venture capital that's going to fund new business.
To switch it up a bit, maybe we can also ask about how you choose these individuals and what your process is like writing about them. And I imagine that varies from figure to figure because some of them you're writing about posthumously, obviously. Some of them you're writing about as they're dying, and some of them, very much alive.
Well, I started with Henry Kissinger when I was very young. And like Steve Jobs and like Elon Musk, some of you may have known Dr. Kissinger. He's a brilliant person, but he's a difficult person. And it was very hard. I spent a lot of time dealing with him, and he would call me early in the morning saying, Walter, you still don't understand why I had to bomb Cambodia or something. And so after doing Henry Kissinger, I decided I was going to do somebody who had been dead for 200 years, so I wouldn't have to deal with them. And that's why I did Benjamin Franklin. And after doing Franklin, I realized that Franklin was a great scientist. I had thought of him as a diplomat. I was doing him coming out of Kissinger, somebody who did balance of power diplomacy. And then I realized the balance of power came from the lightning experiments, that his science informed him. As you say, sometimes we get intimidated by science as separate, the scientists and the humanists. One reason is Einstein. But Einstein made it seem too mysterious, too difficult, too uncertain. And so people got afraid of science. So I did Einstein in order to demystify science. After I did Benjamin Franklin and then Einstein, Steve Jobs called me up and he said, do me next. And I said, yeah, Franklin, Einstein, you arrogant. I'll do you in 30, 40 years when you retire. But then I was told by somebody close to him, if you're going to do Steve, you have to do him now. And I said, well, I didn't know he had been diagnosed with cancer. And the person said, yes, he hasn't told people, but he called you the day after he was diagnosed. So I realized this was a great opportunity to look at somebody who had changed our lives. But once again, after having to deal with him, I went back 500 years and did Leonardo. So I go back and forth. Sometimes it's a little bit grueling to deal with a living person. So it's like, okay, it's time to go back in history where I can be calmer.
So you're going back to Alexander the Great after this?
No, I'm going back to Marie Curie, because Marie Curie is the final person in all these revolutions. What Marie Curie gives us is the understanding of the chemical revolution. So I want to do another book about another woman scientist and also about somebody who laid the groundwork for the revolutions of the 20th century.
That's very inspiring to hear, particularly
Invite me back when the book comes out.
Inshallah. And
Inshallah.
I think to wrap up then, we're talking about all of these previous revolutions. Would love to hear, in your opinion, what is the next big breakthrough and who should we keep an eye on?
Well, obviously, right now it's artificial intelligence. I'm amazed by what artificial intelligence, the large language models, the chat GPTs can do. But I don't think that's the big thing. I think the big thing is what I said that Elon is trying to do, which is real world artificial intelligence, where you have robots and machines that can actually see and see in 3 dimensions, which is hard for a machine to do. To be able to look in this room and know everybody is here and to walk around the room and be able to do tasks. Likewise, self-driving cars. And so I think the application of artificial intelligence to real-world situations will be the next revolution. It will cause a lot of moral questions, just like gene editing has, which is why we not only need the humanists who can help understand these moral questions, but we need the humanists to be able to understand the science. And so I think that next revolution is something that we all have to watch, and it will be applied to the other revolutions. It'll be applied to genetics. It'll be applied to medicine.
Thank you so much, Mr. Isaacson. It's been a true pleasure.
Yasmin, thank you so much, and thank you for all
Thank
you
you,
do
everyone.
here. And it was a real joy and a real honor to be here in Riyadh. Thank you so much.
الحديث مع الأستاذ والتر آيزاكسون كان صراحة أكثر شيء يونس سويته أتوقع هالسنة. أكيد لما ختمنا الكيو&اي مع والتر آيزاكسون شفت الناس بالمسرح وشفت كيف من جد أخذوا كل كلامه للقلب، فحسيت إنهم ظنوا بأنفسهم إنه اليوم أوكي أقدر أكتب كتاب من نفسي وأقدر أتعلم وأقدر أكون زي الأشخاص اللي والتر آيزاكسون يكتب عنهم، لأنه هو باختصار خلانا نحس إنه أوكي كل واحد يقدر يكون قياد وكل واحد يقدر يكون كاتب، وأكيد من بين الحضور في كتاب جدد طلعوا اليوم.
اسمح لي اني اعرف عنك انك الرجل الذي يحمل الموت بين يديه.
اقتربت من الموت كثيرا ووثقت الموت ايضا. يعني هذا الشيء خلاني الطبيعي في حياتي انا اعيش في اجواء حرب. الغير طبيعي اني اكون في اجازه مثلا.
تذهب بين الجثث وتصور، تذهب الى مناطق قريبه من العدو وتصور. خلينا نقول انك قاعد تحاول يعني تسجل بطوله امام الكاميرا.
في تلك اللحظة التوحد بيناتنا اللي صرنا 6 أجساد بروح واحدة.
في كتابك أصداء الفناء كنت تتكلم إنه الكتاب هذا لا يصلح لأصحاب القلوب الضعيفة.
الكتاب هي 13 قصة لاقتراب من الموت، لا يصلح لأصحاب القلوب الضعيفة. في تفاصيل مؤلمة لما الناس هربوا على الطيارات وتعلقوا بالطيارات، فلما ارتفعت الطيارات سقطوا، فكانت أشلاءهم ما زالت موجودة على أرض المطار.
أعتقد بعد 25 سنة في هذا المجال إيش اللي بقى في ذاكرة محمد عرب؟
في تلك اللحظة أنا كنت أنظر للموت أمام عيني،